Well, welcome to this week's edition of Doorstep History, coming from my place of work, the Coffin Works in Birmingham's Jewellery Quarter.
Well, we're sticking with our theme of World War I this week, and we're going to be taking a look at the Austin Village.
In 1917, the Austin car factory had changed from manufacturing cars to being involved in the munitions trade, and plenty more workers were needed at the factory. Longbridge was pretty much out in the countryside in those days, making it difficult for the workers to get there. So Austin decided to build a village, and that village is still there today, and we've been to meet some of the people that live there. So we're here at the plaque on Central Avenue. The plaque was erected in 2002 by members of the Austin Village Preservation Society, and it says it was to commemorate the life of Herbert Austin, 1866 until 1941. As it says on the plaque, it says the unique cedarwood bungalows were transported from Bay City in the USA. And here to tell us all about it is a local history expert, Don Hazard. The plaque's there to represent the life and work of Herbert Austin, and where we are now is a village that he actually created.
That's right.
What was the car manufacturer doing, creating a village?
Right, well there he is in 1917. He has 22,000 workers. This is a rural area at the time. They're travelling in 4, 5, 6 miles on foot, on bikes, on buses, on trains. He's got them staying in hotels, in hostels, and he's not happy. He says, what I want from these people is really good quality work. They're working very long hours, 10, 11-hour shifts. I've got to provide somewhere good for them to live, somewhere they can get a proper meal, a proper night's sleep. So, in the middle of a war, with a great shortage of materials and men, skilled labour, he sends to America and gets these unique houses sent for 5,900 kilometres, 3,700 miles, across the North Atlantic, infested with U-boats, sinking 1 in 4 British ships that was leaving harbour, and he brings them across and builds the whole place, connected to the Eland Valley water supply, connected to the Birmingham sewage system, roads, trees, 300 trees, a proper garden village, a proper place, a proper community. And he builds it all in the middle of a war in 9 months flat. Now the Austin, the company he founded, very sadly has gone, but the village is still here as a monument to his imagination, his daring, and his basic decency in wanting to provide a good place for his workforce to live.
And it really is a hidden gem, really, that even people in Birmingham don't know too much about.
That's right.
So should we go and have a walk around?
Yeah, sure. The houses were all wood. He wasn't allowed to have steel or concrete or lots of bricks because of the war. He said, if you want a good workforce, a good committed workforce producing good quality work, you have to provide good conditions. So he sent off for these homes to America, and they're extremely well laid out, very well planned indeed. Each had 3 bedrooms, they each have a good living room, a proper kitchen, a central heating boiler, an indoor toilet, and a porch. And the porch is quite fun because the porch is big enough to hold a pram and a bicycle. Because of course people didn't have cars then, but they did have prams and bicycles, and that was somewhere to store them. So it was very thoughtful.
Don is meeting up with Eunice, a local resident, and they're visiting her home so that he can find out more about the houses and she can find out more about the village.
Remember, something like 46% of all war workers in the shell factories were actually women. So they were travelling in on bike, on foot, on coaches, on trains, and they were arriving at work, some of them exhausted from long journeys. And he said, look, we can't have this. What can I do about it? And he went to the government, and the Ministry of Munitions, which was anxious to do anything to increase production, loaned him £75,000 to buy the land and to buy the houses. And of course, he could build these quickly, and they were efficient houses. He could get 8 workers in every one of these houses. So at first they weren't family homes. At first it was 8 workers sleeping in each of the houses. But that was much better. In lots of factories they were sleeping like in army barracks, in old huts, in sheds, anything. So this was luxury up to what a lot of war workers were facing. and it meant they were only half mile from the works, get a proper meal, proper night's sleep, go to work fresh, and do these 10 and 11 hour shifts they were working at the time, including, of course, young women. Lots of the women were only 15, 16, 17 years old.
So the workers are coming in fresh, though, we're going to be working better, working harder.
Producing more. This is why the government lent them the money. We don't know where he got the idea of ordering them from, but he did spend 12 years in Australia, from his teenage years till he was 28. In Australia, of course, they had wooden houses, lots of them, including prefab ones. So it's possibly he got the idea from that, and then made inquiries, and he found out that the top company for making these was the Aladdin Company in America. They were the pioneers, they produced the best quality, they produced a lot of good advertising, so they're more generally known than many others. In 1906, there was a young man living in Bay City, which is in Michigan State on Lake Huron in the USA, and he worked for a boat building company. Now these were unusual boats because they were kit boats. You bought them and put them together yourself. Now that meant, of course, it had to be absolute precision. You couldn't afford to have a boat where the parts didn't meet, otherwise you're going to sink. So this young man called William J. Sovereign was a real expert at woodwork. And then the company started making little boat sheds. And he was thinking about this, and he said, if they can make boats and boat sheds in kit form, prefab form, we can make houses. So he went home and borrowed his mother's kitchen table and started to work out plans for producing kit homes. And he thought he'd done a pretty good job, so he set up his own company. And he called it the North American Construction Company. And he started making homes where every single thing you needed was packed in the right order. Every nail, every coat hook, everything was in the right order. And then 3 years later, his brother Otto joined him. And Otto was a marketing expert, keen on advertising, sales. And he said, North American Construction Company, sounds a bit grand. He said, do you remember the story of Aladdin and the lamp? And when you rub the lamp, the genie arrives and he builds you a castle overnight. Let's call ourselves the Aladdin Company, Aladdin Ready Cut Homes. And that was agreed. And they started advertising, and they reckoned you could build one of their houses in 1/3 of the normal time, which saved a lot of time, a lot of money. And what they guaranteed was total quality. Practically everything that could be done by machine was done by machine, and this was down to the last degree. This was down to millimeters, and these things fitted perfectly. And to make sure they worked, they was to put together each one. Before a new model could be sent out, they would try that model out. And if it didn't work perfectly, it was back to the drawing board. So the emphasis was always on quality. It was an extraordinary, brave and imaginative and daring decision at the time. The French were fighting the Battle of Verdun, which lasted about 10 months and took about 750,000 casualties. The British were fighting the Battle of the Somme, the biggest they'd ever fought up to that date, with 500,000 casualties, and lasted right from July to November. And yet in the middle of this, Austin had the daring and the imagination and the courage to order this village. At the time, one ship in 4 that was leaving British harbours was being sunk before it could return by German submarines, German U-boats. But all the houses arrived safely, and it included on the ship was included an American manager who came over to supervise. So he must have been a fairly brave character to brave the North Atlantic at that time. Now, there were rumours at the time that a lot of houses had been sunk on different ships. But if you go into the Central Library in Birmingham, look in the archives, you can see the order numbers, and you can see they only ordered 200. One of Austin's daughters wrote that some of the roofs had gone down the Lusitania. The Lusitania was sunk 18 months before Austin ordered the village. So that's just a myth. All the ones ordered were delivered. And in fact, in 1944, the Austin Company wrote to Aladdin Company in America saying thanks and saying that this village is every bit as daring and resourceful and imaginative as George Cadbury's famous Bourneville. Now, in some ways, although I think Bourneville is wonderful, in some ways this is more daring, because George Cadbury had plenty of money, he had plenty of land, he had plenty of labour, lots of materials, time to build. He had 30, 40 years to spread the estate out over. Austin was building this in the middle of a war, the biggest war Britain had ever faced, where 5 million men were in the armed forces, where there was a total shortage of labour, and yet he built the whole thing quickly, but with quality.
Welcome back to Doorstep History as we continue to look at the village of 200 wooden bungalows built in World War I for workers at the nearby Austin Works, built on former farmland radiating out from a central avenue in Longbridge. Today the village is one of the best kept secrets in Birmingham.
They decided they'd issue a catalogue. So just like you can send off and get a new dress, a new skirt, a new shirt, a new pair of trousers from a catalogue, you could get a new house. This was a catalogue issued in 1917. This is a reprint. And you can see the name on there, Aladdin Ready Cut Homes, ready in a day. And throughout, there's 60 different houses. Now I imagine this probably caused a few problems in homes, because when a couple was sitting there discussing what house they'd like, the man would be saying, "Oh, here's a nice cheap one," and the woman would be saying, "No, look at this, got 4 bedrooms." So I imagine there's a few quarrels over this.
Amazingly, each house cost only around £125. All you needed to do was to fill in a form and order it. It was as simple as that. And the same with the furniture as well, which came ready to fit.
And you could put it up, in some cases with the smaller ones, in a day. Now this entire estate, roads, sewers, connection to the Eden Valley water supply, planting the trees, building the houses, took 9 months flat, in the middle of a war. The most interesting thing about them is that you can move them around. Because the beams go right from wall to wall, the internal walls can be moved around. So you can enlarge bedrooms, have 2 bedrooms instead of 3, enlarge your living room, divide them up. So this is an infinitely adaptable scheme.
Different people have done different things to their properties, and it's always interesting to see what people have done. I've done quite a bit to this property. Originally I had what was originally a utility room, which I've made into a big dining kitchen with French doors because I wanted to see the garden. My property has got an extension, which when I bought it there were 4 bedrooms. Because I've removed the 4th bedroom, which was originally the utility room, I've now got 3 bedrooms, and my granddaughter, who lives down the road, would stay every weekend if I let her, or if her mother let her. And now my grandson, who's 4, he wants to have sleepovers and loves coming here. So even though there are a lot of elderly people, even the youngsters like living here. This is my next door neighbour, where they've still got the original cedar wood on their bungalow. But if you look at my bungalow, you'll see I've got the UVPC on. I've had that put on, partly to reduce the cost of the painting, because to paint the complete bungalow is very expensive, and partly as insulation for the heating, which has made a big difference. So the 2 sides have got the insulation on, and the front of my bungalow has got the original wood on. Because personally I feel that the outside needs painting every 5 years to keep it in good repair and order. My choice entirely, I tend to do the front of the bungalow every year, just touching up round the windows and bits and pieces, just to keep the front looking nice and fresh and clean.
Of the 200 houses originally built, 199 are still here. Now the council was always panicked about fire. Would the whole place burn down in a mass fire? But actually the only one ever destroyed was when some workmen were in the hut, and they must have dropped a fag or something and burnt the thing down. but otherwise they're all here. Though all throughout the early years, every house used to get a warning, keep your fire insurance up. So every now and then, after the war, they built these brick houses, and they're supposed to act as fire breaks. Actually, they're very good houses. They're 4 bedrooms, and in the largest bedroom, they put a larger radiator. It was typical of the planning. They put a larger radiator, and they said if anyone's ill, they'd probably be in the large bedroom, and the radiator will keep them warm and help them to get better. In these houses, in both houses, right down to things like the curtain rails were all included. They all came with it. Hooks, everything. So you really could just put your furniture in and move in once it was completed.
The frontages are still pretty much the original wood.
No, the wood is, yes. The windows have mostly changed. A lot of the windows were the smaller windows originally, and people gradually changed them for the larger, more modern style of windows. But they still do come across some of them. But the basic shape, especially with the fronts, is still the same. When you look at that timber was cut and sawed 98 years ago and travelled, as we say, 5,900 kilometres across the Great Lakes, up the St. Lawrence, across the North Atlantic, down through Britain, and here it is, 98 years later, still in first-class condition. It's a tribute both to the quality of the timber and the quality of the workmanship, and also to the fact that people are now really proud of them and look after them very well indeed.
Now, apart from just building the estate, he put in community facilities for the workers, didn't he?
He did indeed. I think one of the wonderful things about this is that under the pressure of war, he was still thinking a long way ahead. He said, what does the community need? They needed a shop. So he persuaded the co-op, the old Tascos, 10 acres in Sturgey Cooperative Society, to put up a shop, first made of wood and then later of brick, just round the corner. He had football fields. He had a village centre around the old farm buildings where they had a billiards room, a room for ladies to sit and talk and read. A couple of times a week a lady physician would come up for any women who needed special help. The Reverend Audie from Thomas the Tank Engine fame used to come and give a non-denominational talk, religious talk, and later on there was a little Baptist chapel which Herbert Austin opened for them. They had cricket pitches. There was all kinds of activities for children. They had covered play areas for children in some of the streets. So he was with tennis courts, so on. He was really out to create a proper community village, not just a series of houses or long strings of streets like lots of Birmingham. This was going to be a genuine Austin Village, Longbridge community, and it worked. It did.
When I moved in, I did join the Austin Village Association, and they print this little booklet, and we pay £3 a year to be members. If we have any problems, we can contact any of the committee who will help us sort out our problems. It has various bits of interesting things in, gardening and Christmas party and trips that they do. So for £3 a year we get the support of the committee and we get this booklet.
The society itself flourished between the wars, the Longbridge Society, and rather nicely, if you were a junior member, you were called a Longbridgeette. Right? And then in 1939, as all the men went to war and the women were working long hours in the factories, the association died away. But it was reformed in 1990, and the people began to realise they had this unique village, and they petitioned the council, who examined it and realised you had an historical gem on your hands here. So they decided to give it conservation area status in 1997. So now you can't really change the fronts. You can do all kinds of things inside or do additions at the back, but the outward frontal views are now preserved, which is correct, because there is nothing else like this in Britain or even in Europe. So we have in the middle of Birmingham here a unique village. Well, Herbert had planned to build a lot more. He probably thought he could build about 600, but at the end of the war, as the war orders ended, suddenly he had 22,000 workers and no money coming in because they were no longer wanted planes, shells, tanks, armoured cars and the rest of it. So he gradually, over the next 2 or 3 years, he went bankrupt. He had no money. And the government insisted that he pay back the loan quickly. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was actually a Birmingham MP, Austin Chamberlain, but he insisted that Austin pay back the loan quickly. So, faced with this, he couldn't develop a new town after all, and he gradually sold off the village house by house in order to raise money.
So this is quite a unique estate, wasn't it?
It is. If you think this estate travelled 3,700 miles or 5,900 kilometres, there is no other village I know of in the world that travelled 5,900 miles. So here in Longbridge, you've got the most travelled village in the world.
Well, that's about all the time that we have for today.
Hope you've enjoyed the programme as much as we have. We've certainly enjoyed making it, and we hope you'll join us next week.
Goodbye and thanks for watching.